Hi everybody. So in this lesson, I'd like to talk about concepts beyond the chord matrix. So we've spent enough time over these last few weeks talking about all of the chords that exist within the key. So, you always go to C major. Let's go to G major for a minute. You know the G major's got one sharp. Right? We sing the diatonic dial all the time. There's the 5 dominant chord, minor 6, half diminished 7, and then back to the 1. Right? Same thing could exist in minor, minor 1, diminished 2, major 3, minor 4, major 5, major 6, and then the diminished 7, back to 1. We're using the harmonic minor scale there. Right? Raising the leading tone on the 5 and the 7 chord. Okay? So, most songs that we listen to don't just stay in that key. Right? In fact, that's what makes music interesting is we begin to branch out to other keys. And so in this lesson, we're going to begin to explore that. So I'd like to take you over to my notes here. So let's read them together. So the concept here that we're going to be talking about is called secondary dominant and secondary leading tone chords. And so the first point I want to make is because the dominant to tonic chordal relationship provides the strongest harmonic pull, which we've talked about. Right? Going back to the piano, here's a nice 5 chord, 5-7. Resolves itself to there. Right? G-B-D-F resolves itself to C-E-G, 5 to 1. You could do that in any key. Right? Let's go to the key of E flat. There's the 1 chord, 1, 3, 5. Now build my 5 chord. So ti re fa. Right? And there's a nice 5 to 1 resolution in the key of E flat major. Right? So that relationship provides the most harmonic pull at this point in our study of music. So next bullet point. Normally, dominant to tonic 5 to 1 in major, right, or 5 to 1 in minor occurs only on scale degrees 5 to 1. Right? So that makes sense. And then finally, to make music more interesting, we can move that 5 to 1 relationship around to other places in the scale. So to show you, there's just a great example of this. Of course, you all know the main theme from the movie Up. Right? And that's just the beginning of it. Of course, it's just so simple and so lovely. Starts off with a nice F major 7. F, A, C, E. Right? My analysis is a little wrong. I should have had a 7 chord, a 7 right next to that 1. And I forgot about that. And so we have a nice little descending bass line, but it's basically the same chord. Same notes. The tonality kind of shifts a little bit there, but it's roughly staying in F major 7. It's the tonic function. Now, look at what happens next. We get a brand new chord right here, but that chord is not in the F major key. So if you look at that chord, right, the chord right here, it's a G7/B, right? And you remember the slash literally just means that B is the lowest note. If we transfer that to an inversion, it would be, if you look at my hand here, right, the root, the third, the fifth, the seventh. Remember the phone number? 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 4, 2. So when the third is in the bass, that's called the 6/5 inversion. First inversion of the 7th chord is labeled as 6/5. And that's why we see that 6/5 down there. But here you can see all these 5s and slashes, and I want to begin explaining that to you today. So G-B-D-F is not in the F major scale, right? If it were in the F major scale, we would find that it would have a B flat in it, which would be the minor 2. Right? Of course, you've memorized your matrix. You know that the 1 chord is major, the 2 chord is minor. So if Michael Giacchino had stayed in the key of F, up would have ended up sounding like this. You can't even play it. So we would have that kind of a tonality. But of course, you know, it's much better this way. Last phrase. Okay, so let's move on here. In this example, the key is F major. In measure 6, Giacchino uses a G dominant 7th chord. G is scale degree 2, which should be minor, as I just pointed out. Instead, G7 is the beginning of a new 5-to-1 relationship. Now pause right there. G7 is a 5 in what key? G is 5 in what key? Well, it couldn't be any simpler. Right? G is 5 in C major. Right? Going to the piano. Right? There it is. Right? Using all the white keys couldn't be a simpler example. G, B, D, F is the 5 of C. Okay? So to finish that relationship, the tension is resolved in measure 10 with the C major chord. So you can see over 4 bars here, he's just basically playing the G dominant chord, and then that is resolved here. So listen to measures 6 through 10. Right, and there's the resolution of that. So we say that G7 to C, okay, since it's not in the key of F, we say that G dominant 7th to C was borrowed from the key of C, since that is the only key that would contain the G dominant chord to C as 5 dominant 7th to 1. Now this whole lesson is based on that one sentence, so I'm going to read it again. So we say that G dominant 7th to C, okay, that can only exist in the key of C major, right? Because 5 is the only place where a dominant 7th chord can exist. 5 to 1. Okay, but Giacchino is using that 5-to-1 relationship in a different key. Okay, so now I'm going to take this next step. We're in F major, so F is 1, and then here's this 5-to-1 relationship in the key of C, but when we analyze it in F, okay, let me just take you here. We talked about G to C being a 5-to-1 relationship, as I'm indicating here in the parentheses. But when you take it back to F, right, we can't call C a 1 because F is 1. Okay, C is the 5 chord. So what we do is then we want to acknowledge the relationship of 5 to 1 in the key of C. So we say, oh, it's the 5 of this. It's the 5 of the 5. That way, we can say that we're in F major. We can say that C is the 5 chord. And then we can say that G dominant 7th is the 5 of that 5 chord. So here's on the piano. F major. Let's go down here. F major. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's the dominant 7th in F major. Okay, it's not really, the dominant 7th's not really used in this piece. But if it were, it could. It could if it wanted to. Okay, now, in measure 10, we arrive at that G, and before that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's the 5 of the 5. So to go backwards, G7 is the 5 of 5. That leads us to C. And C is the 5 that leads us to F. So you can see we can begin to stack up relationships that allow us to pull other chords into our key. All right, and this is called a secondary dominant chord, because the dominant chord is existing in a secondary key someplace else. So once again, listen to this. And I don't know, I think it's just so cool how you can take the one chord and then instead of going to the two chord, you can make it major. So secondary dominant chords give you permission to make any minor chord major as long as it's followed by the resolution that would make sense for that new dominant chord. Okay, so here's one more time. And then this big lift. Right, and then going to C. And it almost sounds like we're going back to the tonic. But remember, here's the tonic. Right, so when you start to introduce secondary dominant chords, it begins to play with your sense of where home base is in music. All right, so there's our first example. I got another example here for you. Everybody knows this. Okay, so just three measures with a big concept in here. So again, we're in F major. Couldn't have picked a better example for us to sort of keep our head in F major. So there's yesterday. Now let me just read this together with you and I. In F major, F is the one chord. Okay, so E, the chord that follows it, should be diminished since it's scale degree 7. Right? If you remember, in the key of F, 1 major, 2 minor, 3 minor, 4 major, 5 is major, 6 is minor, 7 is diminished, and 1. It's the diatonic dial. Do, mi, so, mi, do, major chord, re, fa, la, fa, re, etc., etc. Okay? 3 is minor, 4 is major, etc. So back to the sentence over here. E should be diminished since it's scale degree 7, and then the A chord should be minor since it's scale degree 3. 1, 2, 3. The A minor chord should be 3. Okay? So my question to you is this. How do McCartney and Lennon make the last 3 chords work in this key? Before reading the answer, does the D minor chord function in the key of F? That's the last chord. Does D minor function in the key of F? So here's F, right? 1 chord's major, 2 chords minor, 3 chords minor, 4 chords major, 5 chords major, 6 chord is minor. There it is. D, F, A is the minor 6 chord. Okay, so down in the answer, it does. The D minor chord is the 6 in F major. So now, when you've got chords that don't quite fit, you look at the relationship to those chords as they progress to the chord that makes sense. Right? All the chords are moving to somewhere. So that E minor to A, and then ultimately to D. D is the first chord in the key of F that we can go, oh, we're in the key of F here. It makes sense to us. So what you do is you backtrack from that chord and then see how the chords that don't make sense work in relationship to the next chord that makes sense. All right, so back to this sheet here. The D minor chord is 6. So we need to figure out how the E minor and the A chords, A major, set up the D minor chord. So look at the relationship outside the key. Are there any 5-to-1 relationships? Think about the minor chord matrix with D being the tonic. All right, so you can see I've given you the answer here. All right, but basically, let me explain it from the keyboard perspective. Okay, D minor is sort of our destination in measure 3. So look at D minor. Right, there's our D minor scale, and if we build the matrix on that, 1 chord's minor, 2 chords diminished, 3 chords major, 4 chords minor, 5 chords always major, 6 chords major, and then the 7 diminished to 1. Now, look at this. D, if D is 1, what's 5? So, Ti, Re, Ti, So. There's your 5 chord. Right? So instantly we can see that A major to D minor is a 5-to-1 relationship. Right? And then, just because I can see it in my hand position, look at this, the 1, 3, 5 of A, look at what's on top, E. Okay, and so E in D minor should really be diminished, but I think they just sort of fudged it a little bit because they wanted the sound of the minor chord. So it's essentially a 2, 5, 1 in D minor. 2, 5, and then 1. Right? So if it were truly in minor, you would hear diminished. Diminished to 5 to 1. But he's sort of playing around with that 2, 5, right? That would be a 2, 5 in major, right? But then goes to the minor. That's what makes Yesterday such a great song, is your brain, it's constantly bouncing back between major and minor tonalities. Okay? So, I hope that makes sense to you. E to A is a 2 to a 5 that exists in really D major or D minor. So that's it. Right? We can see these chords are borrowed from that key. So now we've got to take all that information and sort of package it and now put it back into the key of F major. So when we analyze this, let's put things back into the original key of F major. D minor is the 6th chord, you can see right there. Now if we were to work backwards from that, you can see that A is the 5 of that 6th chord, as we explained up here. And then 2 is leading us to that 5, and it's still within the framework of that 6th chord, right? 2 to 5 to what would have been 1 here. But now D minor, we've got to respect the original key of F major. And so that's how this all gets sort of packaged together. So you can, if we now go back and listen to these 4 chords, there's our tonic chord. And then what makes Yesterday such a great song is immediately we go out of the key. That E minor chord's not in F, but it's setting up a new 2, 5, 1 that leads us to the 6th chord. Right? You hear that in Beatles music all the time. So, since we borrow the dominant from the secondary key of D minor, these chords that work outside the key are called secondary dominant chords. Okay, and that's the lesson. So now I want to take you back just here to this, to the Bach prelude, and I want to look at some of these secondary dominant chords that exist. Okay, so we're in the key of C major, right? Look at this first chord that doesn't work in the key of C. D, F sharp, A, and C. Okay, any major chord, anytime you come across a chord that's not in the key and it's major, you should immediately think that it could be a dominant chord. It could be the 5 chord. So just make that assumption initially, and 9 times out of 10 you'll be right. So if we have D, F sharp, A, C, D is the 5th of what? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 of G. Okay, G does work in C major. It's the 5 chord. So here's our tonic. Here's the 5 chord. And then if we were to pretend that that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, D would be the 5 of G. So this D major chord is really acting as the 5 of the 5, which then leads us back to the 1. So we're basically stacking up 5s on top of each other. C is 1, G is 5, and then D would be the 5 of 5. So why don't we call it the 2? Why don't we just say, oh, it's the 2 chord? Well, because 2 is minor, and this chord is major. So we have to rationalize it in a key that makes sense for itself. Okay, and so back over here to the Bach example. It's 5/4/2 because of its inversion, and then when it resolves to the 5 chord in first inversion. So that's how secondary dominant chords work. Now there are also things called secondary leading tone chords, but I'd like you to just wrap your brain around the secondary dominant chords first. Okay, so there's the explanatory lesson. I'm going to stop the video here, and in my next video, we're going to put some of these secondary dominant chords into practice for you.